what is this new module? And there's a bit of a teaser, and perhaps maybe leading to some people dropping off. It is very specialized, and there's a number of people, existing users, to thank for its development, but I'll get to that later. But I just thought I'd run through some of the key features or functions around what it does, and then go and give you a demonstration. So this new module basically looks at cost drivers that drive the reason to run projects, revenue or benefit drivers, time drivers. There's a funky animation to get old school there. So how long are these costs and benefits going to last for? And when you combine all of those things, you can generate a cash flow. If you want, one of the things you can see from a screenshot here that we've got in this new module is you can derive from that cash flow how you're going to fund it. And so in this particular screen, you'll see some pale blue lines. They're actually the investment. So building a new building or a new road or whatever it might be. And it could be anything, as you'll see in this demonstration. We've got all types of investments, including IT, software, new product development, you name it, marketing campaigns, you could do anything. But in this scenario, what we're doing is we're actually looking at how much you can fund from a debt facility, and when the peak debt will that be, and how much interest will you pay on that line of credit. And so, and that's a key feature within this new module. Also, if you've got cash flow, you can just change the discount rate until that cash flow sums to zero, and that gives you a thing called internal rate of return. If you have a company discount rate, or you'd like to apply a rate of return to that, you get a net present value. And then from that, you can start to get, with our integration with Power BI, some visualizations around that. So this is an output from a scenario for an aged care investment. And one of the things to see on this particular screen is the bottom right-hand corner where you've got the column charts. They're basically demonstrating different scenarios. So this is crucial to any sort of investment decision. It's the what if this happens, what if that happens, what if you delay your presentation by a week. And I just highlighted that same graph, but just that portion of it that shows different scenarios. And so you have a little sort of explanation of what the different scenarios are. This is all sort of aged care vernacular, which is kind of where this module's been derived out of. But with a background in doing feasibilities for about 30 years now, it was quite easy to take quite a complicated model and dumb it down for just normal property development or IT investments. Mapped funding sources is that bit that I was talking about before, where you can say, okay, we need to spend $1 million, $10 million, $100 million. How are we going to fund it? And in this sort of summary of that, you can see that it's a big investment in the sense that it's an aged care, goes over 50 years, but the initial construction, $17 million of the 50 is being funded by debt. And that is all automatically calculated with the interest down below calculated as well. You can see from the funding table down below. So what does that mean? What is this new module? Well, it is, for UniPhi's first new module in about 3 years, the communications module being the last new one. And we called it Feasibility. So it is the first module that we are not including as part of the application. You do need to bolt it on, although existing clients will get access to it without this cost, but new clients will need to pay. And it's just a per deployment cost per year. All of the subscribers that have a project manager subscription or above can access it, so there's no limit in terms of how many users. It's just a fixed fee to access this particular module and have it added to your deployment. You can find out more at that URL. And it's part of a 15.1 release that will form the November webinar, where I'll show you all of the other little bits and pieces that we've completed as a result of feedback from the UniPhi 15 release that occurred a couple of months ago. And so this is available from the 18th of November. And as I said, we'll do another webinar in a couple of weeks' time just to show you the 0.1 bits. But obviously the main point of that 15.1 release is to launch this new feasibility module. It's out there, it's live. It's Frankenstein's monster. And so that's the three big announcements. while I've all got you there, I'll go into a little bit more detail about this new module and just show you what we see as some of the key differences to other applications or your traditional Excel-based feasibility modeling. So the first big thing, and there's actually a pretty boring backstory to this that I won't bore you with, but anyone who does see me on occasions can, if they are interested, can ask. Our goal, our sort of design brief to our software developers was to be able to get the ability to have all of the variables, all of the assumptions that go into a feasibility on one page. And we've been able to do that. So here we are, we can see across the top, we've now got feasibility, yay. And within that, I'm looking at the drivers sub-navigation. And as I scroll down, this is aged care. And you can see that, and the other thing I should explain about this is a platform product. And so out of the box, it comes with the capability of building all of this stuff, but it's not necessarily there. That's a service we can provide, or it's something that others can actually, end users can actually build themselves based on their own way they want to model their particular investments. So there's actually an unlimited possibility in terms of what you could model in this particular platform. In this exact screen here, it's modeling a new aged care facility. And so all of the variables that drive that are on this page, broken up into some nice and easy headings: cost drivers, revenue drivers, and timeline. And so you can see here we've got things like how long the project runs for, construction within that, capital upgrading, renovations, the lifespan of facility, escalation over the timeline. All of that gets configured behind the scenes by an end user into the cost and revenue modules, and into the phasing of those cost and revenue modules to enable it to calculate an MPV and to enable it to determine feasibility. And so I can then scenario analysis in this page to my heart's content, saving a new snapshot every time and generating a new scenario. And I'll demonstrate that in a moment. The first thing I want to demonstrate is that this sort of assumptions on a page, if you will, is, as I said, very configurable. So we're looking at aged care facility here. If I click on this tab, I'm looking at a student accommodation project where we're looking at apartments to rent, rental prices. So all of these fields have changed, and there's a lot less of them because it was just a demonstration. We kept it simple. And I'll come back and look at this one in further detail in a moment. And then the third one, if I click on this particular tab here, we then get new benefit drivers and cost drivers. And you'll actually see, depending on our client and what they're using it for, you've got a benefits module. That's the same as the revenue module. It's just looking at the fact that it's not always revenue. It could be, and as per this case, a reduction in cost. And so we label that module. It's exactly the same module, functions the same way, but it's just labeled as benefits. And so we've got benefit drivers instead of revenue drivers. And you've got, this is a scenario when this one is a new customer facing system to handle inquiries, kind of like our new chat facility, but this is potentially all channels included, with the goal of reducing the burden on their call center. And so the benefit drivers is a reduction in the number of calls per day, a reduction in the time taken per call, and therefore a reduction in the cost per call. And so you get those benefit drivers. You've got the purchasing of software and the training of people in that, and then you've got a timeline again. So a completely different scenario, completely different investment, modeled within UniPhi on a page. Change the scenarios, hit save, and you get yourself an MPV. So now we're going to sort of lift up the hood. The thing about MPV is it is a black box, and the good thing about UniPhi is it removes that black box through the different modules that already exist, the cost and benefits or the revenue and cost modules. I'm just going to show what that's doing, and I'm also going to show how the funding works. So the first thing I'll show is how the MPV ends up coming into calculation. And so like I said, it actually will be calculated, and I'll demonstrate this at the end of this sort of walkthrough, a change in MPV result. You put in these numbers, you hit save, and you hit snapshot, and you'll basically generate a new MPV. But how that works and how that's set up is quite complex, actually, and something that people will need to learn. And a lot of people engage with consultants and others to set up their Excel-based platforms, that will probably still potentially be required. But the thing about this is, once you've developed it, if you're investing in common things like property developments or aged care facilities, you'll be able to use that model time and time again in a very robust way with all the variables on one page, and an end user not necessarily needing to know the engine room that drives it behind it. Just they have the knowledge of how much the market's going to pay for these facilities and what the ongoing operational costs are, etc. So they can add their value to the inputs, but also get the outputs they need to determine whether it's a worthwhile thing to do. So to demonstrate some of that, in this particular student accommodation one, which is quite simple, I'll go to the cost module first and show you how that sets up. And basically, if I select my FISO costs, chart of accounts, we're using chart of accounts and cost structures to set this up that a lot of you will already be familiar with. And when I go into the budget, which a lot of you will already be familiar with, we've had this derivative function for quite some time. But what we're actually doing in this instance is we're deriving the costs from those variables in a page. So you entered in land cost, construction cost, and construction duration, and it automatically brings it into this page, which then gets derived into the relevant field. So that $20 million is deriving 100% from that $20 million there. If I go into the driver page and change that to 15, it concertinas down, changes this to 15, and more importantly, changes the cash flow phasing automatically using the auto phasing function that we've got. So this cash flow phasing profile says May 2020, starts there on an S curve, is cash flowed. That's being generated automatically through the auto phasing structure. And the auto phasing structure, which is this here, you can see construction cost again, 20 million being derived from that one entry point in the feasibility menu, escalation being derived from the feasibility drivers menu, and all of these dates being derived from it as well. You can see this little arrow here. When I click on that, you can see all of the information is being derived from dates and information keyed in on that feasibility driver page. So whenever I change it there, it concertinas down into here and automatically updates all the cash flow, and therefore generates a new net present value. Revenue works the same way. If I go into the revenue budget, again, using a chart of accounts that you can structure up any way you like and have as complicated or as simple as you like. You've got the 1 and 2 bedroom rental coming derived from a metric. And these metric formulas are able to be calculated by an end user, by a configurer of the model. And again, it'll then just concertina into this particular screen when you change those variables on the feasibility driver page, and equally again into the auto phasing. So you can see again that it's being linked. You would rent the apartment out when the construction phase finishes, so there's a relationship there, and for the duration of the investment, which again you can see if I click in on here, should be related to that. That 240 would be related to the investment duration. And so that derived from that, I can go back to my drivers page and change it, and my cash flow will change. The outputs of that, this is the screen, a little bit different to the PowerPoint one. This is the actual result of that particular feasibility. If I blow this screen up for a moment, you'll see it's got the 1 and 2 bedrooms, the construction costs, the consultants costs, the land, the marketing, and the other costs coming in over time. And that's the cash flow profile year on year. This is the end result of what's driving NPV. So we saw back in the other screen $7 million, and you've got the breakup of that. So obviously the revenue is coming from the bedroom rentals, and that's the positive charts here. Most of the construction cost is the negative, and you've got land, and then you've got some marketing and other. So these are the drivers, the impacts of your NPV. And as you get more complex NPVs, you can scenario model how sensitive it is to changes in those variables, which we'll demonstrate in a moment. This also profiles it visually, as you can see the land, that's that black line there coming out here, and then construction costs, and then revenue coming in over time. So this is just one scenario. The what if is generated very, very quickly once you've got these models set up. If I come into my system again, I'll just close that form down. I'm now in my student accommodation drivers page. And if I was to just, we know it's a $7 million job at the moment, so it's looking pretty good. But if I think that, there's a risk that could blow out to 25 million, and I might have to pay 5.2 for that, and I might only get $600 in rent. and 450 for 1 bedroom. I change all of those variables on this screen. I hit snapshot save. It'll take a little while because it's actually concertining down to do all those calculations, but that wasn't too bad. And then snapshot, and I'll call it, construction increase. We had land as well, but and rent drop. We give it a date. We wouldn't tick these two. It's just a scenario that we're looking at. We hit save, and then we come into Power BI and we hit refresh. This will take a little while, so we can pause for breath and take a bite of a sandwich or drink of water or what have you. It does build the suspense though, and if you have Hall of the Mountain King playing in the background, it can definitely enthuse you as you watch this spinning wheel, find out what happens to your feasibility. I should say, when I snapshotted that in the driver's page, it's actually taking a snapshot of the cost and the revenue modules like you would normally if you're in those modules. It doubles up and does it twice. And you can see, lo and behold, we increased all the cost and we reduced the revenue, and we've now got a scenario that has a negative MPV. You can see here negative 2.5, and you can see that the yellow part of the graph there has increased quite dramatically. The green and the black has reduced, and hence we've now got this scenario that shows how sensitive we are to changes in those construction costs and to rentals. And you could change one at a time, and you saw how quick that was. Change one at a time, snapshot it, do 5 scenarios before you refresh your Power BI, and you then get 6 in the screen, and then just start to see how sensitive they are to changes in assumptions, and then align that to how confident you are in your assessments of those variables. And so, yeah, one screen, one set of variables, punch a few numbers in, hit save, and you've got yourself a feasibility analysis that does try to remove the black box. It does try to say why something is MPV, negative or positive, which you can then articulate to the powers that be. Hopefully they will listen and decide accordingly with a rational decision around whether something is worth investing in or not. So that's basically the feasibility part, but added to that is the financial engineering bit, I guess. And if I jump into a different scenario, because it has data, we're now looking at this retirement aged care facility that's going to cost us $22 million in construction. We're in the feasibility module, and it also has a budget, auto phasing and manual phasing. In this scenario, the budget we're talking about is the funding budgets. Where is the money going to come from to pay for this 22 million plus the 3.5 plus all of the consulting costs that derive from that? And so if I go to budget, what it does is, just need to go down there. Again, it's based on our chart of accounts, but with the feasibility module, there's now a option to select a chart of accounts as a funding chart of accounts. And so we now have 4 types of chart of accounts. We have an internal cost, an internal revenue or benefits, a project cost, and a project funding chart of accounts. Once you've labeled it project funding, it then becomes available in this feasibility module, and you structure up your chart of accounts how you wish, but I would imagine it'll be something similar to what we've got here. So we're going to draw down from a debt facility to pay for something. We're going to have to pay interest on that. We're going to have to pay line of credit fees and application fees, and then we need to repay it at the end. And then we can have as many of these facilities as we like. And you can see we started with facility 2, and you can have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the equity is the balancing residual, as it always is. So in balance sheets, equity is what's remained, profit and loss. The profit is what's remaining after you've paid for all of your expenses and got your revenue. So it's always the residual. Equity is automatically calculating the residual balance. To determine what you're funding, though, is the cool bit, in that what you can do is you go to this drawdown, and all of these codes have code types, and depending on the code type, UniPhi knows that it's something. For example, you can flag a code that you can label however you like. You can label it money I owe dad, but if it's the interest code, then it'll know it's the interest payment dad's charging you for borrowing money to get that deposit on the house. And then this is the drawdown factor here. And so this is the capital element of it. And if I click on this little arrow again, what you're then able to do is say, what do you want me to fund from my cost chart of accounts? So obviously cost chart of accounts is where you're spending the money. And you can see here we've ticked construction and other construction costs. It doesn't have to go down to the bottom level. You can do the summary. You tick those two, and then you say, how much of that are you funding? I am only going to get 75% funding on my construction. I could change that to 100 and I'd be then 100% financing my construction phase of the project. What that does then is it derives all the cash flow that occurs in the cost module that we just did when we punched in our drivers and our durations and everything else, and mimics the cash flow for that on a 75% basis. So if I go to the manual phasing, for example, there's no manual phasing to be done. It's just a way of viewing the results. And you can see here that there's the blue is showing you what it's deriving from, which is the construction cost. And you can see that you start drawing down on that facility, which has a facility limit of $20 million, so it won't go over that. $2,500 a month, because that's what we're paying in other construction. And then as you go along in time, you'll see, construction kicks in and we're funding that. And then at the end of the construction period, when you go live, you'll start either selling the units or renting out your apartment, and you'll start to repay that amount there. That's the bit that needs to be done manually at the moment, but yeah, it's not a big deal. You're basically looking at what you've drawn down, the 19,448,000, and making sure that's what's coming here to balance it out. But yeah, so that then you can present that to a bank and to a funder and say, this is my profile, this is my facility amount that I'm going to want from you, $17 million in total. Peak debt's going to be at this point in time. I'm going to draw it down over this profile. This is my case. I'm going to make a lot of money out of this project. It's got a 7.87% return on equity. It's got an MPV of blah, and make your case to get some funding for that project. So pretty simple, really. It's a lot of complication in the background. It's been a fantastic software development job from one of the best developers I've ever worked with. And yeah, from an end user perspective, hopefully, it's something that they can develop. It's going to be quite complicated for the configurers of the model. That is a complicated thing to do. And I can sort of touch on that a little bit potentially because I haven't gone too far into time. But once it's set up, from an end user, from a person who's being tasked with providing a business case in a business, they will literally go into UniPhi, to the feasibility module, to the driver's page, key in their variables, hit save, and voila, they've got themselves an MPV. Go to the budget, derive how much of that investment they want to get from debt, and hit save, and then voila, they've got themselves a funding profile. There are reports in the reports module that spit this stuff out as tables. There's also obviously the ability to screenshot these types of interfaces, and equally, if you've got Power BI embedded, that information would come into the Power BI dashboards here. The same graphs that you can then share with people internally, or if you've got external facing access to those as well. Just to get a little bit of a flavor of how complex it can get, the way all of this works and the way the flexibility comes about is that everything in the driver's screen are actually project custom fields. But we know which ones are to appear in here because we relate them to metrics in the chart of accounts. So it starts out life as a custom field, and then it gets derived into a metric in the chart of accounts. And then from that, it'll display in this screen. So there's a 1,000 custom fields in this deployment, literally 1,000, there's so many. But you're only seeing the ones that are relevant for this particular project out of all of this portfolio of crazy projects that we have to demonstrate different parts of our system, because of the fact that it's those custom fields that are used in the metrics model. And so if I go into configuration, for those who've never seen it before, there's a project configuration. and there's a custom field sub-navigation. And you can classify and categorize that. And you can see benefit drivers and cost drivers are one, but you can also see climate and building area and building functional units. All of this stuff doesn't exist when you install UniPhi out of the box. You have to decide what you want because people want different things. We have a wildlife cat trapping statistic for clients and things like that. So it's all up to you. And then down here, you create these fields, and you can see none of these fields were in those key driver pages. These ones were cost drivers, and the way they got in there, and these ones were for the aged care, and you can see you can limit when they appear by linking them to sectors and types, but equally that doesn't matter so much because they will only appear against the drivers page when they're used against a chart of accounts as a metric. And so to demonstrate that, we go into the configuration and we go to metrics. And if I select FISO revenue, you can see that I've got, now this isn't that hard to build because when you hit add, it gives you the dollars and stuff like that. But this is the model basically. It's saying, okay, whatever they've put in as rent per week, multiply that by 52 weeks in the year, by the number of apartments, by the occupancy rate divided by 100 because we get them to put it in as a whole number, and then multiply that by the investment duration that they've put in by the timeline. So you've created a formula that gives you the total value of the one bedroom rental over the 30-year or 20-year period that you've put in for the investment duration. That then gets derived, because it's being put against this FISO revenue, when I go to revenue and I go to student accommodation, that then displays in the budget screen underneath. That calculation there, 23,166,000 is there. And I say that relates to this code line here by deriving it 100%. So 100% of rent is derived up there. And so that's all concertinaed now from the drivers page directly through into this. And then when I go to auto phasing, I then say, okay, this is all related to the end date of the construction phase, and then just time it out by the investment duration and phase it out like that. Now we have ramp ups and ramp downs and all other complexities in the aged care profiles that we didn't set up for this one, but you know, in its simplicity, just to demonstrate it, that's basically how it's working end to end. And because of that, I can literally just jump back to here, come back to my drivers, change all these again, hit save, and they'll flow through to the dashboard like it did earlier in the demonstration. And that's it. That's been an initial thought of that type of system in 2003, which led me to actually get into software development in the first place. So it's a 17-year journey or 16-year journey. But realistically, the last 6 months, there's a fair bit of work gone into this module. Hopefully, people out there will find it of benefit. We've got some great thanks to make to the aged care industry specifically. Quite a number of organisations there have helped us out with that, including BAP Care, Southern Cross Care, Aged Care Plus, from the Salvation Army and the like. So thank you to you and all the people involved in that effort. It hasn't been difficult to then tweak it into other industries and other types of projects, but it is being used in anger, so hopefully that piqued your interest and you can get in touch with us to get yours upgraded